Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Normie CE Training. Today is April 4th, 2023. Want to welcome everybody to the room. Want to welcome my admin people that are now here in the room and everybody else that was here in the Normie session that we had 15 minutes prior to going live. We appreciate you hanging in there with us. Again, those are the things that we allow our members to take part in prior to going live across all the other platforms. And I want to welcome everybody that's live tonight with us on Facebook, Twitter, Twitch, YouTube, DLive, and wherever else we're out there. We're out there on about 12 different platforms. So welcome, everybody, and thank you for joining us. We got a full boatload of stuff here tonight, so I'm going to make it real quick here. We do have an interview coming up about credit cards, credit card fees, and how it really affects your business. Now, we're not endorsing this. This is more of a concept that I've noticed over the last year or two or three that's been hitting me up in the Northeast. I know Tim said out in the Midwest he hasn't seen this too much yet, but credit card fees are getting out of control, and the businesses are now starting to fight back, and that's what this guy's going to talk about. So I'm going to bring him in, but after that, we have snuck in another short presentation on meth cleanup. It's been a big topic in the news. This is a slightly older interview we were able to get our hands on, but it's really good information. You'll recognize the people that are there. It's very good awareness. And after that, we will then go into our product training. That, again, we will close down the public platform. So for any of our active Normie members that are watching on the other platforms, you need to go to impact.normie.org, log in, and take advantage of the Zoom platform that we are going to remain on when we shut down the other live feeds. Sorry, folks, it's for active Normie members when we get to that point. But until then, enjoy. So I am going to start this up, and this is information on credit cards and what businesses are doing now, fighting back against the tremendous fees. You may want to turn your volume up just a little bit. The guy who I spoke to was a little bit soft-spoken, but I was able to hear him clearly. So let's get through that, and then we'll get to the other presentation afterwards. Please stand by, everybody. I want to welcome my next guest, Max Crone, to our broadcast here today. And Max comes to us from outside of our normal network of contractors, but he offers a service that's kind of unique, and I'd like him to explain it to people. So Max, if you would introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about who you are, and the company is Benchmark, I believe.
Yeah, thanks, Lance, for having me. My name is Max Crone. I'm with Benchmark Payments. We're a payment provider, payment processor of both credit cards and ACH payments, or e-checks. And we've been working in the home services space for like the last 7 years, found a lot of success in it. And I kind of stumbled upon Normie from being in the carpet cleaning world and a couple recommendations. And then I found Doug was in New Orleans, which is also where I'm based. And I figured it'd be a great connection to reach out and start offering my services to Normie members as an added benefit.
Well, I appreciate you being here with us. And, you know, we talked a little bit, and you had said something that really piqued my interest. And I think it will for the people watching this too. Basically, you said that merchants, contractors are basically losing money with
Yeah.
credit card services. Can you help me out with that a little bit? Because that piqued my interest.
Yeah, every single day. So as you know, every time you swipe a credit card, it costs about 3% of the total transaction volume. That's 3% average. If it's a debit card, it's a little less. If it's a signature business credit card, it's gonna be a little bit more, maybe up to 4%. And so on an average $100 transaction, a merchant is only keeping like $97 and change. So let's say they're operating on a 10% margin between they're buying a product and they're reselling it as part of their service. Like maybe they come in, do some repair, and they take a part and they resell it at a 10% margin. adding that 3% back in adds 3% back to that bottom line margin, increasing it by 30%. So you add 3%, but from 10% to 13 is a 30% boost. So there's a huge opportunity that merchants are missing out on in increasing their bottom line and increasing their margin and really growing their business, because at the end of the day, there's only so many things you can do to really control your growth in business. And a lot of it is putting money into marketing or hiring, all these really time consuming activities. Whereas if you're saving credit card fees, you're immediately putting that back to your bottom line within, the next time you swipe a payment after, you start working with my type of company. So,
I know the example you just gave about like $100 purchase, but in our industry, we're doing remediation work, we're doing assessment work, and we're looking at large ticket prices. I mean, doing an assessment at $1,200, $1,500,
Mhm.
all of a sudden you look at that fee that comes out, that's huge. 50, 60, $80 in, credit card fees just to make the sale.
Exactly. And it just starts to add up. And eventually you, at the end of the year, especially now, a lot of businesses are doing their taxes for the year and they started doing it towards the end of December. And I'm getting a lot of calls with people that are saying, you're right, it's way higher than I thought it was. I'm losing, $400,000 a year, losing $100,000 a year just to banks for the credit card fees. And there you go. How can we fix that? And so then we
So
start.
how can we fix that? What can they do?
So the program that I've been selling the most, and it's because my customers want it, is the ability to pass the credit card fee on to the end user. It started off maybe 10 years ago, only in the nonprofit world, and gas stations were the first. And then it got approved with a couple bills were passed. There was some legislation that happened, some lobbying, and now in all 50 states, and actually just now in Canada since October of last year, it's completely legal to pass the credit card fee onto the customer. And as long as you give them an alternate way to pay, like cash, check, ACH, everything is great, because you have two kinds of customers. Ones that are fine paying the credit card fee because they want the convenience. And then you have another customer who doesn't want to pay the fee and they simply pay you cash, check, or ACH, digital check. And so it's worked out really well in the past. I would say in 5 years, it's really gone mainstream. I imagine a lot of people who are watching this have heard about it and they've been thinking about it and they have questions about it. And that's exactly why I think this conversation is so important right now. Businesses are looking to save as much money as they can. And this solution is sitting right there for them to take advantage of.
Yeah, I noticed this a few years back with, I think the first ones that I noticed it with were American Express.
Yeah.
That a lot of the merchants were charging a percentage up front on top of your bill
Mhm.
or credit card fees, and it kind of sounds a little bit in that direction. But one of the things that I've always had issues with is how do you find out what your fees actually are?
So
What kind of rates you're paying and such.
it's a great question. Some merchant processing companies I've noticed make it a little difficult to find what your rates are. And the reason is they don't want you knowing what your real rates are, or if you're going to do a comparison to somebody else, they want to make it hard for you to even find, to send them like a merchant statement generally is what I take a look at to do an analysis. So certain companies, like I got a statement back from Square yesterday from a merchant, and they don't really have a merchant statement. I did some Googling and I was like, is this right? Did he send me the right documents? And Square doesn't really even have a merchant statement. So what's on a merchant statement is it lists out all of your transactions, how much they were for, and the exact card brand and type. So not just Visa, but Visa Business Signature or Amex Preferred, or whatever it is. Each individual card, and there's hundreds of them, have a very specific rate. And so when you look at a merchant statement, there's really two areas to take a look at. They're going to give you an idea what your rate is. One is what's called the effective rate, which is the most general way of looking at it, where you take the amount of fees that you paid and the amount that you had taken in, your revenue, you divide them and you get X amount, usually around 3%. So like, let's say, you were paying 3% and you did $1 million in business, you would have $30,000 in fees. Is that right?
That's a lot.
That's a lot. And so passing the fee on to the customer and giving them the option is this. I mean, some people say, hey, I don't feel comfortable passing the fee. And I go, you don't feel comfortable yet, but once you try it, you will. And so a lot of people kind of hop in that way. But so that's the general way, the effective rate. The way that I do an analysis is a little bit more in depth. I look at it for each card type and each card brand. And what that does is I compare that to kind of like a base. And if I see any of the percentages are significantly higher, you might be paying more for all the business cards you take. Let's say you do, a lot of contracting work, business to business, and the person who's paying you is another business. You might be overpaying on those rates. That's something I see that's very, very common. Reason is there's a system out there called level 2, level 3, and that reduces business card transactions interchange rate. I know there's a lot of lingo in there, but basically a lot of people overpay specifically when taking business cards, and that's a huge area that I'm able to reduce payment fees.
Well, what's the difference between the effective rate and an interchange rate? Because now you throw some terms out there that I'm not familiar with.
Yeah, so the effective rate is all of the fees that you pay to process a credit card combined. Interchange is just the fee that you pay bank to bank. You can kind of call it a bank fee. So you have the bank who issues the card and collects the payment at the end of the day. Then you have what's called the plus. So you have interchange. That's a rate that's a little bit more difficult to change. And that's why business cards do really well when businesses that take a lot of business cards do really well with us, because we are able to shift the interchange rate lower. The plus side of it is a little bit more variable, and that depends more on the issuing card type. And so sometimes they're as high as 50 basis points over interchange. Sometimes it's 10 basis points over interchange. But generally, I can reduce the plus part by about 50%, and interchange, depending on if it's business or not, 10, 15, 20%. But again, if they wanted to pass the fee to their customer, it reduces it 100%. So effective rate takes into account if there's monthly fee, if there's any chargebacks and there's chargeback fees, if there's insufficient fund fees, if there's a gateway fee, if there's a terminal that they're renting the big card swiper a month for $20. Effective rate takes all of the interchange, the plus, and any of the additional fees and adds it all together to create an effective rate. So sometimes what happens is credit card companies get you by saying, oh, we'll take credit cards for you at 2.5% or 2.8%. That sounds amazing. That's a great rate. But then you look at your fees and it's $100 a month to be on that program. And so they just shifted where the money is so that the credit card rate looks lower, even though at the end of the day, your effective rate is still around 3%. So you have to really look into an analysis. And that's something I've studied over the last couple of years it's pretty quick for me to look at it and be like, oh, that number shouldn't be a 4, that should be a 3. You're overpaying on your Visa business cards, And so, yeah, it's not as complicated as it sounds, but it's definitely the best way to understand if you're overpaying is to do an analysis.
I've noticed over, I'd say the last 2 or 3 years that more people have gone to using credit cards. Now, I'm sure COVID may have had something to do with that, not wanting to pass money back and forth and stuff like that. But are you seeing an uptick in credit card usage over cash and checks and stuff like that?
Definitely. I would say that COVID didn't jumpstart it, but it really accelerated the use of credit cards. Now that interest rates are going up, people are kind of deciding, do I want to finance this? For example, in the HVAC space, a new HVAC system could be $15,000, $25,000 or more. And they think, do I want to finance this, or do I want to, for example, set up recurring billing on my credit card so I'm charged $200 a month for the next 10 months, And so sometimes, there are certain credit cards now that have come out that are 0 interest for 12 months, as long as you pay it off within 12 months. And so what a lot of people are doing is they're taking out one of these 0 interest credit cards and they're putting these $20,000 transactions on a credit card rather than taking out a loan at whatever the interest rate is. I think it's still going up by 25 basis points every time Powell speaks. So people are shifting away from taking out small loans to paying more on credit cards. So, and that's just in the last 6 to 8 months that I think the rates have been hiking, maybe a little more. And so that's another push into it. I mean, from cashless, or, from cashless transactions, I go to restaurants now and they say we don't take cash. And so that's all credit card, it's been pushing and pushing and pushing further and further. Every single day, more credit cards are being used. Plus, people like the idea of getting points and miles for every dollar they spend. I mean, I know a business, met them at a trade show about a year ago, and we were talking about credit card processing, and I was with the owner, and he said all of the trade shows that they do over the year are covered by all the points that they've gathered from that year's spending. And so he's like, we basically go to all the trade shows for free. The hotels, the flights, it's all from our Amex points. And I'm like, that's awesome. So
Does this work with like the wallets on the phones and stuff like that? Is that the same type of credit card processing, or is that different?
yeah, it depends really on how a merchant is accepting a credit card. So if they have a retail store, or if they have a terminal that they bring around for field work and someone wants to tap their phone to it to take a payment, yeah, definitely. That's pretty standard in the industry, although there has been a shift from the analog type of terminal with the buttons on it to touchscreen terminals recently, which is what everyone likes because they're used to smartphones now and they don't want older school terminal. If they're emailing invoices and a customer gets an invoice on their phone and they open up a link to pay, it would go to the saved card information that's in their browser, the same way that any e-commerce transaction. So depending on how they take payments, yes. And I will say that soon, not yet, everyone's kind of in an arms race for it right now, is the feature where you can tap a phone to another phone to make the payment. Apple just released that technology, I don't know, 6 months ago. And a lot of my peers in the industry have been talking about it. They haven't released it yet, which is great because that becomes extremely competitive with a company like Square, which built its entire business on that little box that you tap on to pay, and that's about to be eliminated. I see a lot of customers wanting to move away from hardware and have it all processed via the web, whether that means paying a little bit more for email invoicing because it's a little bit more expensive. Usually comes in around 3.3%, whereas a swiped card could come in almost a full 100 basis points lower at 2.4, 2.5, 2.6. And so, but people are okay with that because they want the convenience. They don't want to have to pair a Bluetooth device to their phone every time they take a payment or carry around a little square. They already have so much that they're doing and so many tools. Why another one that's that small? So hopefully in the next 6 months, more. I think there's one platform that's doing it now that we work with. More will be doing it very soon.
You're too young to remember, but 40, 50 years ago, science fiction that was out there where there were movies and TV shows where basically money didn't exist any longer. It was all based on credit and electronic devices. It's become science fact.
Yeah, it really has. I've heard that only 3% of the money that's flowing in our economy is actual cash. And that 97% of it is all digital and lives on your phone. And it's just numbers changing around.
Well, if you want to have some fun at a cashier one time or with the cashier, when you pay with cash, ask them if they need to see ID. Then they just get completely confused. So what's the difference between, you mentioned Square before and that and PayPal and using credit cards? Does it work the same way or are there different fees?
So as a bit of a boutique firm, what I mean by that is we have a mid-sized office, but we have access to some publicly traded payment processing companies kind of as our vendors. It gives us the ability to match a merchant with their needs. So if they're taking payments in the field, we'll set them up with a different solution than if they were taking payments over the phone in the office. Or if they were taking payments via e-commerce, we might set them up differently with a different provider than if they were taking payments via email invoicing. And so we're able to fit in the solution that they want and any matrix of it. I figured out I think it was Monday, I figured out that if you combine all of the different possibilities between in-field swiping a card and email invoicing and e-commerce and over the phone, I think there ends up being 120 different variations of how they might take their payments. And so we have solutions that fit all of those. Again, it's like email invoicing, on the phone, swiping the card, in the office, and through a CRM. I think that was the fifth one. And so 5 factorial is 120. And so there's so many different solutions.
Can
So
you,
compared-
I didn't mean to interrupt you, but just listening to what you're saying, can you do like time payments and stuff like that through your system?
Can you repeat that?
Time payments, like somebody is, you're making a purchase and you have, 30, 60, 90 days on additional payments.
Yeah. So certain the platforms that are like more shifted towards e-commerce don't, because that's on the spot transactions. But when you're looking at emailed invoicing, definitely there's definitely solutions that do that. And then they also have text to pay, so you can text them or email them the invoice, and then it says the net time at the bottom.
One of the things I noticed with PayPal, and because I've used them for years, I've used several of the other ones just trying them. They do a guarantee when they approve a purchase that even if the customer reneges on paying, you're still going to get paid. Is there any kind of fail safes in the system for that?
Yeah, so built into the back end of our processing are ways to kind of do what's called mitigation, but before it happens. So chargeback mitigation is a team that if somebody decides to do a chargeback, which is not a return. So a return is when they call your business and they say, hey, I want a refund, I want a return. And you say, okay. Chargebacks when they go to their bank and try to fight the charge with their bank. And so there's different ways that you can protect yourself from getting chargebacks. The most common one is getting a signature when somebody swipes a card. That's the most common. That's why every restaurant you go to asks for a signature. And so when it comes to the digital side of it, like taking a payment on an email invoice, there are just certain code and programming that's built into it. For example, having to fill out your name, address, phone number, email. The more information you get from somebody that's specific to them makes it much harder for them to fight a chargeback. So for them to win a chargeback rather. And so I would say that's not really an issue with us. Yeah.
Okay. Well, the other thing that I've come across with things that I've done and accepted were ACH payments.
Yeah.
Is that different rate wise and how that gets processed than credit cards?
Yeah, ACH rates are significantly different than credit cards. So I would say the average ACH rate comes in somewhere between 0.5% and 1.5%, depending on the network. I know that, sorry, I didn't mean to schedule this right when they were doing the landscaping next door, but if you can hear them blowing, I apologize.
That's okay.
Like QuickBooks, for example, charges 1% for ACH. So generally when I'm working with QuickBooks customers, we come in just under 1%. And so that's a lot lower. If the average credit card is 3% and the average ACH is 1%, let's try to push people to send ACH. And ACH is a lot more difficult to fight to issue a chargeback. And so, sorry, every time he goes, blowing the leaves. So if we can push more people to do ACH, that's great. So if you charge customers the processing fee, some will shift over to ACH, so they'll lower the rates anyway.
Can you explain what ACH is exactly? I never quite understood what it stood for.
Yeah, ACH is an automated clearinghouse. It's automated clearinghouse. It's basically the company that fronts the money to the vendor before the credit card or before the transaction's actually gone through. So let me give a little bit. Yeah, so that's a good way to put it. I just want to just double check something here. So yeah, so basically the same way that when you pay on a credit card, you as a consumer have 30 days to pay off your credit card, but the business still gets paid 1 to 2 days after that. So how does that happen? There's a company that basically puts the money into the merchant's bank account, takes on the liability of that credit card payment, and then gets paid a couple days, up to 30 days later. So it works the same with ACH. When you have a $10,000 transaction, there's a company that just pops that into the merchant's bank account, and then the automated clearinghouse gets paid, a couple days later on it, or up to 30.
Well, that's one of the things that I've always looked to do because there's some other payment methods that are out there like Amazon Pay and stuff like that. You could wait 2-3 weeks to get your money.
Yeah, so one thing that some of these, I mean, I love the strategy with PayPal. I also love I hate the idea of having your payments in many different places. Sometimes I'll buy something on Facebook Marketplace and I'll open up my Venmo and I realize I have $400 sitting in there and I'm like, I totally forgot about this. So I don't like having my money in different places. So what I try to do is make the business more efficient by saying, stop using PayPal, stop using Venmo. Let's just use this email invoicing platform from your phone. You know, keep all your money in one place. One of the other issues with PayPal, which they've used to their advantage, is that you only pay a payment processing fee if you want the money within like 48 hours or something. If you wait up like a week, there's no processing fee. And a lot of people aren't cool with that. And so with us, you know, you get the money in 2 to 3 days or 48 hours. It could be next day, depending on if you're doing the zero cost program or not, in any scenario. So you'll never be held up. Your money will never be held up. I just had a merchant the other day who had like $10,000 being held by Stripe because they were like questioning the transaction because it was above his normal volume. And so like something like that would never happen with us. And he became a customer of ours pretty quickly.
So if our members wanted to get more information from you, how would they contact you?
So the best way to contact me is my email, which is maxcron, MAXCRON @govpn.com. I can put that in the message to you if you wanted to with the post, or myself, 516-448-4768. I'm happy to take a look at a merchant statement, kind of do an analysis over the phone and point out the areas that are overpaying.
Okay, well, I do appreciate you spending the time with us. We're actually going to expose our membership to this and we'll see what kind of reaction we get. I know everybody's always concerned about the credit card fees. That's one of the big things. And it sounds like it's a probable, I'll go beyond possible solution for some people that it could make a big difference in their businesses.
Yeah.
And that small percentage does make a difference.
Yep. And what will happen is a lot of people are going to start thinking about passing the credit card fee to their customers. They want to see some other people do it first, and then some brave people will be the first of the group to do it. And then in a year or two from now, everyone's going to be passing the fee. So it's not a question of will you do it? You know, will you pass the fee to the customer? It's when will you pass the fee to the customer? Are you going to wait another year to start saving money, or is it something you want to take action on, you know, sooner? So I think that, you know, there's a lot of money to be saved, a lot of money on the bottom line that people are missing out on. And obviously we do what's called traditional processing, where we just save on fees, not just pass the fee on to the customer. But eventually all my customers switch over to passing the fee. They're always nervous. They always go, well, my customers give me pushback, will I lose business? And I always do the math with them. How much business would you need to lose the amount that you would save? It's like $1 million, for example, is $30,000 worth of processing. How much, you know, if your average ticket's $1,000, you have to lose 30 clients over a year to just break even. So we end up doing the math and they're like, you're right. So people love the program once they start it. So.
All right, very good. Well, we will possibly do another one of these sessions down the road, especially if we get a lot of questions about it. And we'll see where that goes.
Awesome. Yeah, I'd love to do a live Q&A or do a live walkthrough of a merchant statement with a specific customer. You know, maybe they want to hide their financials, but some people are open to that. But yeah, thanks for having me, and I'd love to do this again in the future.
All right. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure having you here.
Thanks so much, Lance.
Well, hopefully everybody was able to hear and see that. He was an interesting guy to talk to. He's very knowledgeable about credit card processing, and he comes across as very genuine and helpful. Again, I have not used the service. I have not looked any deeper into the service. However, I have experienced the credit card issues with having to pay the big fees and going to now restaurants and local stores that are putting credit card fees on top of every transaction. So it looks like whether we want to, you know, avoid that or not, kicking and screaming, we may all be heading in that direction. Don't know, but it's something that you should be aware of, look into. Even if you go to a restaurant, take a look at the receipt that you normally just sign and, hand in for payment and see if you're getting hit for an extra 3%, 4%, on top of everything else. So take this as an awareness and go from there. Any questions you guys saw pop in during that? Roger, Tim, Mike, anything? Before
A question that really would have been good for Max from Roy. Not how he does it with the spreadsheet. Oh, my camera's not on. Sorry about that. It really would have been a good question. He with his remediation protocols, he builds in 3% at the end of the calculation. I don't know if that's wrong or not. That's
Yeah, I don't know. And I think for that, you just reach out to him. Max Cron is his name. It's Benchmark Payments. Just take a look online. You'll find it. And he did give out his phone number, which I didn't write down, so I can't repeat it. So sorry about that. But for our Normie members, you'll be able to see this as an archive. If you watch through it again, you'll be able to see that information in the archive.
What's his organization again, Lance?
Benchmark Payments.
Okay, I'll find it.
All right, I'm going to move on then to the next session, which is about meth cleaning or cleaning up after meth and some of the hazards and things you should be aware of and know about meth, which is very interesting, especially in the places it's showing up that you're not expecting. And we're talking about serious, serious hazards with this. Even if you're not in the business of cleaning up, even if you're just frequenting a location that happens to be some of these hotspots now, you can actually get dosed just by contacting surfaces. So let me bring this one up. Again, I'm going to ask everybody to shut down their video and mics. We'll play this through. We'll do some questions afterward, and then we'll be able to move towards our product section. So please stand by, everybody.
We hear about it in the news. It's an issue that we all want to be aware of. We need to be aware of it, especially in the cleaning industry. What are we talking about? Meth contamination in facilities. We know what happens. Today's episode is going to spotlight what we need to know right now in the cleaning industry. With me today is Dr. Gavin McGregor Skinner, the Senior Director of GBAC, and also Scott Vogel, the Chief Operations Officer with EmergiClean in New Jersey. And I'll say this before I let them talk. They have a lot of initials after their names. I don't have any, so I'll just ask the questions. So, Gavin, Scott, welcome.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you, Jeff. Thanks for having me.
Well, let's get right into this because we want to help the industry. Gavin, let's start with you. Why is meth contamination cleanup in facilities, that topic, so important for us?
It's back in the media, Jeff. Drug use in public spaces is everywhere. It happens, we know that. But more importantly, exposure to drug residues is a known risk for every cleaning professional. And I just wanted to highlight, Jeff, what's happened in the news this week. And again, I'm going to start off by saying this is not a problem in public libraries. It's a problem everywhere, in every space that we in the built environment. So in the news this week, the Englewood Public Library in Colorado was temporarily closed due to meth contamination after tests showed exhaust vents were contaminated with meth. Now, this is important, above the Colorado state threshold levels. So you might think, why was this library tested? Well, because another library in Boulder a few weeks ago, about 35 miles from Englewood, was recently closed due to meth contamination. Now, the tests that were done on January the 6th at Englewood Library were done as a proactive measure. The results showed the restrooms exceeded state thresholds for methamphetamine contamination, but there are other spaces in the library that reflected lower levels of contamination, but they were still contaminated with meth. And I just wanted to highlight for everyone, Jeff, but in 2021 and now 2022, in 2021 specifically, more people died in the US from drug-induced deaths. Most were overdoses from meth and fentanyl. And if you look closely at this data, yes, you see or increased, and there were more deaths in those cases where it's always been used, but it also appeared in other parts of the country where it was previously unheard of. So again, I want to emphasize, Jeff, it's not a problem just for libraries. It's a drug use is in public spaces everywhere, and this is a known hazard for every cleaning professional in the cleaning industry.
When someone goes to a library, you would think it's safe. Who would have thought that they would find this there? Other facilities as well. Scott, let's go to you. Those watching this might wonder, well, I can clean it up. I can go in and I'm a cleaning company. Do you need to be certified to clean this type of issue, meth contamination or other issues like this?
Well, the answer is kind of complicated. It's a yes and no. In the United States, there's currently no federal regulations regarding the cleanup. There's only instructions like support that the government has given us. So in 2007, the Meth Remediation Act was passed by Congress, and that empowered the EPA to put volunteer guidelines in place. Since that, a lot of states have adapted standards or some type of certification, but there's a lot of states lacking. And like what Gavin was mentioning before, it's become such a widespread event that the states that haven't created standards or certifications are really left behind. And in that document from the EPA that was released in 2013, what it says is if you don't have that state guideline or certification, then you have to resort back to the occupational health and safety for the 40-hour HAZWOPER, which is a hazardous waste and emergency preparedness and response. So we have to look at that as a whole. The certification is a lot more complicated because you have how you clean it up, and you also have the safety and health of your employees. So they come together, and really we've as an industry and well as the federal government, we have lacked on that standard completely.
Okay. I want to touch on processes here in a minute, but first, Gavin, set us up. Is this meth contamination issue a health risk for the cleaning industry?
I would state, in my personal belief, my expertise, Jeff, yes, it is. And I want to just highlight, again, it's a very highly addictive stimulant. For those who don't know and don't want to know, but, meth can be ingested by smoking, snorting. You could swallow a pill or injection. But more importantly, for the cleaning industry, smoking meth releases several contaminants into the surrounding environment. Again, the most concerning one that we have for cleaning professionals is the meth vapor itself. Now, the National Institute on Drug Abuse states that when people are exposed to secondhand smoke, can test positive for meth afterward. But there's no specific number, Jeff, that identifies what is that unhealthy level of secondary meth exposure. We're talking about third-hand exposure. And that third-hand exposure comes from that meth vapor, that meth smoke that settles that's in the air, but also settles on surfaces. And so it's not a debate today about whether workers will have serious risk of health problems. It's the debate that what we're talking about right now is that smoking meth can contaminate the surfaces and air, and we know that it can persist for months to years. Now, we do know that research on the health impacts from touching a surface that has meth residue on it is lacking. We know that. But when that research is lacking, Jeff, we go to worker health reports. So people that have got sick at work, have gone to the doctor or the hospital, and we know from review of those worker health reports that we've seen skin and eye irritations. We know there's been cough or asthma-like symptoms. We know that those people get increased respiratory infections, sleep issues, changes in mood, they get headaches, and then they also have memory difficulties. So even though the research is lacking about whether the third hand actually happens, we believe it does, based on the health reports, the clear reports. But more importantly, the National Institute on Drug Abuse also says that the health risks are more significant after prolonged or a long time exposure to meth contamination. So regardless, Jeff, of how unclear the science and policy is right now, that risk of meth exposure, that drug contamination in areas where cleaning professionals work every day is a known hazard. And really, we firmly believe that no one should be going to work without receiving education and training on a known hazard.
Okay, good information. Scott, in your previous comment, you talked about training and maybe some certification. So can we assume there are standards, procedures for cleaning spaces that are contaminated with drugs?
Well, as I mentioned before, the EPA has come out with that EPA volunteer guidelines for meth and fentanyl laboratory cleanups as well. And that was actually revised in 2021 because of the increase of fentanyl. Now, you do have some standards that are coming out. The IRCRC is coming out with the S900. So there is some sort of industry related standards that are coming out. Most of your standards are related back into the cleanup and the results and the levels which are allowed, which are based on the state guidelines, which every state is completely different. And we have to look at that. There's no universal number. It is, one could be 0.1 micrograms compared to 1.5. So it really differs. And that's why there's been no universal standard that came up, because everybody is indecisive on what that true number is and how to go about it.
Okay. Why don't you take a moment and just walk us through the process for cleaning meth contamination and validating cleanliness? I know you can't get into all the details, but big picture, before people jump into this, what should they know?
Well, like you said, I could be here for 48 hours just talking about how to clean it up. When we look at the processing validation, I always recommend right off the bat a third-party laboratory for validation. Any type of testing and cleaning should be done on a third party. Just help your liability and anything, just to make sure, especially when we're dealing with meth or fentanyl and any illicit drug cleanup that we're dealing with. Now, when we go a little bit, people have to understand, when you look at the test results, take a sweet and low package, 1 gram of that. By the amounts of trace that some states require, spread that over 25 acres. And if one of that hits, then technically it's a positive. And we don't look at it that way. We think about it as just a small little area, but the results in some states require so detailed cleaning. If the process starts with HEPA vacuuming, ventilation, risk assessment, all of these are from start to finish. And each job will kind of decide a different way on how to attack it, as I would look at it. Are you dealing with a library? Are you dealing with a drug laboratory? Are you dealing with a school, a healthcare setting? Every type of situation will kind of lead you down its own path on the processes. And that's why I could be here for 48 hours. It's just a mere fact of starting off, it's essential that we really do that risk assessment. And then following, for example, the EPA guidelines. It's a really good package. They talk about HEPA clean, vacuuming, wipe down. They talk about all of that. And there are some third-party schools out there as well, like I said, the EPA volunteer guidelines that will give you guidance. But when it comes to the processing, really start and understand the beginning needs a risk assessment, and you need to know what you're going into. And then on back end, when it comes to validation, because what I talked about and how such a small level could make you fail, you have to have that validation from third party. And separating the cleaning from validation is essential when we deal with illicit drug cleanup from meth or any type of fentanyl, any other type of opioids.
Okay, well, I think I'm going to cancel my plans to get into the industry and do that kind of work. I'll leave that to you experts, Scott. Thank you for the details. Gavin, let's have you wrap up this episode and just talk about the big issues for the cleaning industry and what we need to know moving forward.
Yeah, totally agree with what Scott just said, Jeff. Again, let's focus back. Cleaning is about removing contaminants. Cleaning is based on science. Again, you and I have talked about this a lot, Jeff. What you can't see can hurt you. So it's not a matter of waiting for the document to be written or the policies there. It's the fact that this is a known risk right now. And when it's a known risk, again, I totally agree with what Scott said. We need standards for testing, we need standards for cleaning, and we need standards for validating. We need to ensure that everything that needs to be done, the processes, procedures, the equipment, the products in cleaning for health and safety when it comes to contamination is known. It's widely taught. It's widely educated. It should not be a secret, Jeff. So much of what we do in the cleaning industry remains hidden. We're going to be more transparent. Everyone in the industry right now should be trained, educated on how to clean up for drug contamination. And I thoroughly believe that, because from the data that we've seen across the country, that risk is just about everywhere.
Well, welcome back, everybody. Hope you got something out of that. I know it is a major problem. I deal with a lot of emergency services, and we deal with people with fentanyl overdoses all the time. And one of the things about that, people that are overdosing or using fentanyl, they'll rip off the patches they're wearing and just throw them in their apartment, house, in a public place. Those are dermal patches. Anything that they touch is transferring those chemicals, those drugs. And if you're cleaning that up, if you're coming in contact with it, just merely trying to throw it out, you can become contaminated and start to feel sick from it. So just keep that kind of stuff in mind. I mean, I've seen one patient that had 13 fentanyl patches stuck to them. They just kept putting more on and more on. Obviously, they had a serious problem, but you take one off and there's more and there's more. And now you're wearing double gloves, protecting yourself. So take caution. You see fentanyl patches or anything else that gives you an idea there's a meth involvement, back out unless you have somebody that's here trained to really handle that. Any questions or comments that you saw in there, guys?
It's a great interview.
Yeah, I want to thank Jeff Cross for that, and Dr. Gavin McGregor Skinner. They do a great job. I spoke with Jeff about this. He said, absolutely, we can use this type of video on our training programs and TV channels. So I want to thank him again for that. All right. Roy had his hand up. Let's see if he's got a question real quick while we're still live here. Roy, go ahead. Your mic is hot.
Lance, I did some research recently. I had a request for some testing for fentanyl, and so I reached out to a couple of guys that I know, and the thing I really learned about this is the exposure limit in the U.S. is much higher than what Canada's exposure limit is for adverse effects. So it seems that even our testing here in the U.S. is lagging greatly on fentanyl, and that needs to be stepped up. The detection limit is so much higher here.
I agree completely. It's a training issue. It's something new that's really coming out. A lot of people don't understand it. Most people, thankfully, don't deal with fentanyl problems as either users, patients, or cleaning up environments with it. However, the point of this interview was it could be in a library, it could be in a school, it could be any place. So just be aware, and if you see indications of something like that, and it doesn't have to be fentanyl or meth, it can be a whole host of other crazy things out there. If you touch something and start to feel weird, you may want to reach out for some assistance. Let me see if there's anything else in there. Thank you for that, Roy. I think I saw one or two other questions here real quick. Yeah, I'm going to, some of these questions we're going to answer offline. So we'll deal with those later. All right. Doug, I see you're in the room. Did you have anything you wanted to address to the overall group and the other platforms before we shut them down?
Hey guys.
Hey, Doug.
Yeah, no, I don't have anything. I'm good.
All right. Well, we announced it earlier that we were going to be ending this for the public platforms and staying in our Zoom room for our Normie members. Again, any Normie members that are watching on any of the other platforms, to watch the rest of this presentation, you have to go to impact.normie.org to log into our Zoom room. So we'll see you there. Everybody else, thank you for joining. And we appreciate you being here with us. Watch our schedule for upcoming events. You can find that at normie.org and just click on the Normie TV tab and you'll see our schedule. Thank you again, and please stand by everybody else here in the Zoom room while I shut down the other platforms, and we will be right back.